The mysterious lore of the One Piece world continues to expand as we are now formally introduced to a new race of the ancient past known as the Buccaneers. And similar to Sunisha's case, we are told by Saturn that the Buccaneers committed a great crime against the world government and that somehow justified their enslavement. And so that line of dialogue automatically transported me to the scene of Roger and Odin during the Odin flashback, where they feel uncomfortable in Zou because they feel like they're being watched aboard the elephant. And since we know that Sunisha and Joy Boy were friends, I wonder if Imu and the Gorosei were the ones who put a curse on Sunisha and force it to wander the seas aimlessly. Because again, in the flashback, the guys say that they feel like they're being watched by something that's pretty big. And in this chapter, Oda clearly makes it a point to emphasize the power of Saturn's eyes. And we can also see that his power has the ability of having an effect on a person's ability to move. We've also seen that when Momonosuke starts talking to Sunisha, he initially gets a headache. And there's something about Saturn's power that seems to be aimed at people's heads. So if we apply the Sunisha logic to the situation with Franky, Vegapunk, and Sanji being paralyzed, it's possible that maybe a way to free someone from the Gorosei's cursed energy / power is to have Luffy intervene with either the voice of all things or the sound of the drums of liberation. And that would go hand in hand with one of the main themes of the story, which is that Luffy represents freedom, whereas the WG stands for oppression. Now, on the subject of special races, after I saw Saturn looking the exact same age as he does now than he did at God's Valley, I was reminded of how Stussy also doesn't seem to age normally either. There's a scene in Whole Cake Island where she basically says that Pudding reminds her of herself when she was younger, to which Duval says, yeah, how many decades ago was that? So the fact that we have both Stussy and Saturn having apparent demon powers, and neither of them seem to age normally, cannot be a coincidence, especially when we reflect on how Saturn expresses himself when referring to humans. Not too long ago, there was a scene where he was talking to Doberman, and he said that it's important to think of human lives as nothing more than insects, because they can just breed and reproduce. Like, they're essentially replaceable. And so that was the first moment where I was like, wait a minute, like, this guy is talking like he's not a human. Plus, in this chapter, not only does he call the Marines insects, even though they're on his side, but also there's a bit of dialogue where he's grabbing and choking Bonnie, and he says, why is it that human beings feel the need to do exactly what they're forbidden from doing? By the way, great Franky moment here with him saving Luffy from Saturn. Sometimes I do get the feeling that him and Jinbei have similar personalities, or sometimes they operate in the sort of like the same tone, because they're both older, like they're both kind of like the adults. So this was kind of like really cool. Like, it reminded me of that Jinbei moment in Whole Cake Island where he says like, I cannot be afraid of a mere Yonko, but in this case it's like a Gorosei. So I thought that was really cool. It's interesting that Saturn's wound appeared to seal up immediately, and I know some fans are speculating that maybe that's part of the effect of the Gorosei, like all of the Gorosei having the eternal youth surgery performed on them, and that maybe that's also why none of them seem to age. And so I think that's a pretty valid theory as well at this point. Another interesting thing that I noticed about Saturn is that he seems sort of surprised by Franky's loyalty and effort to help save Luffy. And since we now know that Saturn was in God's Valley, and that's where the Rock's pirates were defeated, and that Kaido wouldn't stop talking about how pirates betray each other, and also how he pretty much abandoned Big Mom at the end of the conflict, even though she was the one who gave him his mythical type Zoan Devil Fruit, I wonder if the impression that Saturn got about pirates being treacherous also stemmed from what he saw during the God's Valley incident. Also, I'm not gonna lie, Luffy getting punched in the face in order to be saved while looking like an old man was pretty funny. Now, I knew the effect of Luffy landing his star gun on the side of Kizaru's head was not going to be a joke since last week, especially because it was Franky, the one who actually urged Luffy for help before he threw the punch. And we've had several moments in the series where Luffy starts taking things more seriously or gets a momentary power boost, just based off of the words of his Nakama asking him for more. So I knew that the hit was not going to be something that Kizaru could just casually brush off, but was I surprised to see him in the ground like that this week. And you know it's serious when Kizaru's trolling and sarcasm stops. It's like when you're in school and you get a glimpse of the class clown crying for the first time, or when you see the school nerd finally get a below average grade on an assignment. It's out of character for Kizaru, but it also serves to make him more human, more three-dimensional, and feel more real. And that also goes along perfectly with one of the main themes of the story that we're reading, which is that Luffy has the ability to change people that appear to be locked in their ways. And so I think this is a pretty good time to remind everybody of the number one unbreakable rule of One Piece, which is that at the end of the day, everything in the story has to work in Luffy's favor. Now, on a related note, from a narrative perspective, having Luffy and Kizaru be down at the same time is also a very smart way for Oda to create a space where he can introduce an intermission. Because having Kuma's flashback in the middle of this ongoing conflict makes it so that the reader can get an opportunity to get more emotionally invested in Kuma's character. And that way we can feel more for him when he meets his end near the climax of the arc. Now, given the way his flashback starts, it's pretty obvious that before Kuma dies, he has to be able to see and recognize Luffy as Nika, because there has to be some degree of closure for his dream of wanting to be a hero of liberation. So if he helps Luffy and the Straw Hats escape one more time, it'll be like his dream will live on through Luffy. And so not only does this mean that a part of Kuma's will and humanity will have to be restored before his death, but it also means that Luffy has to go back into Gear 5th at some point after we're done with the flashback. And so if Luffy's getting back up, so is Kizaru, which means that round 2, with both characters taking things more seriously than they did in the first round, is pretty much still on the table. I read a comment on Reddit that I thought was pretty funny. It said, "That squirrel monkey in the cover page just stole a Yonko's nose. Where are we ranking him in the power tiers, fellas?" I'm sure a lot of you already know that Oda based Adult Ivankoff's design on Tim Curry's character of Dr. Frankenfurter from the Rocky Horror Picture Show, but what we find out this week is that apparently his younger version, his younger design, is based off of Richard Simmons.
That's it! You're doing fantastic!
Speaking of character designs, the fact that young Figarland Garling looks so much like Shanks adds more credibility to the theory that Shanks has a family member who is a member of the Holy Knights that looks a lot like him. Because Garling is the supreme commander of the Knights, so he probably got his son / Shanks' brother to join just based off them being related. It's a Nepo baby situation, but nepotism to the max is something that we're already sort of accustomed to expect from the Celestial Dragons. Garling's sword skill is also displayed in the chapter, which genetically also connects him to Shanks. There's just no way anymore that Shanks is not related to Garling. The biggest question I'm left here with, though, is who put baby Shanks in the treasure chest that Roger and his crew found him in after the God Valley incident? Because thanks to Film Red, we know that's about to happen. Things are about to go down in God Valley with the Rocks pirates plus Roger and Garp teaming up against them. So I'm guessing it must have been a safety thing for Shanks to be put in that treasure chest, because during Lost Flashback, Corazon tells him that pirates can't resist taking treasure chests back to their ships. So I'm guessing that somebody put Shanks in the treasure chest hoping that somebody would pick him up and carry him to safety. Occasionally, history tends to rhyme, because we know that just like Roger found baby Shanks inside of a treasure chest, Shanks and his crew eventually found Uta inside of a treasure chest as well. And we know from what the Gorosei say in Film Red that Uta is also a member of the Figarland family. And on the subject of treasure chests, there seems to be 6 of them up on the stage along with the Tenryubito who is organizing the event, and I've already seen fans speculate that since Doflamingo used to be a celestial dragon, that this event is actually what inspired Dofi to hold his own tournament in Dressrosa and have the prize be the Mera Mera no Mi. So it's likely that those 6 treasure chests actually contain 1 rare devil fruit each. And if that's the case, it's pretty obvious that Kaido's fish fruit has to be inside of one of those boxes. And since we know that Kuma also has to find a way of escaping, I wouldn't be surprised if his pawpaw fruit is also part of the bunch as well.
We also know that Whitebeard has to show up here at some point, and we also know that Marco got his power when he was very young. So I've seen some comments suggest that maybe Whitebeard gets Marco's fruit from the bunch as well. If you think about it, it actually does make a lot of sense for the Celestial Dragons to have Kaido's dragon fruit with them. Because the announcer could hype it up like, "The winner of this year's tournament will grant one of you, Celestial Dragons, the opportunity to become an actual dragon."
Now, while it is true that eventually Kuma and Ivankov have to join up with Dragon as revolutionaries, we know from Vegapunk's flashback back in O'Hara that Dragon was first part of a group known as the Freedom Fighters, and that it was actually after the O'Hara incident where he teamed up with Kuma and Ivankov to create the Revolutionary Army. And so the O'Hara incident happened 22 years ago, whereas the God Valley incident happened 38 years ago. The point here being that there's still a lot of time for Kuma and Dragon to meet. It doesn't have to happen in this flashback specifically.
Plus, we also need to see Kuma be made king of Sorbet. Pretty sure the world government played a role in having Kuma be known as this tyrant, this evil king with no mercy. Because according to Bonnie, he was no such thing. Plus, it reminds me of what Morley said during the Reverie, that Kuma has essentially been victimized by the world government his entire life. The beginning of this flashback definitely gave those words a lot of weight. I was not expecting it to be as abusive as it was, especially so early. Kuma literally gets born, and it's one tragedy right after the other. They get turned into slaves, his mom dies, and I don't even want to know what his mom went through. Like, we can just make assumptions, like we can imagine. It kind of felt like one of those scenarios like with Hancock where Oda doesn't really tell you everything. He doesn't spoon feed you everything. So he just kind of leaves you with some pieces of a very dark puzzle, and then it's up to the reader to fill in the blanks. So we know what happened to Kuma's mom. I mean, it's obvious. The physical aspect of Kuma's father gets progressively worse in each panel that he's in. Like at one point you can even see that he's missing an eye. He has like some stitches, like a scar across his eye. At the same time, though, he also seems to be embodying one of the major characteristics of somebody who's a member of the family of D, which is being able to smile in the face of adversity. And so ever since we got that panel not too long ago with Sabo and Ace and little Luffy, and Sabo was mentioning, hey, like you both of you have the D initial in your name. What's that about? And then Luffy says, yeah, I don't really care about that. You can have the D initial if you want, Sabo. That really got me thinking about the D not being something that is related to blood. Maybe it's something that you can earn or that you were able to earn in the past. Maybe that's what Joy Boy gave his allies in the past, kind of like the secret code to be able to identify them. Similarly to how the Tenryubito have like ID chips. I was just watching the Doflamingo flashback, and when his family goes down to the surface, the family is asked to turn in their Celestial Dragon ID chips. So I wonder if the D initial is sort of like the same thing, but for Joy Boy sympathizers. But it's not something that you carry with you. It's, a part of you. It's the will of D. This whole thing also got me to think about Odin and how even though technically he was never confirmed to be a member of the family of D, he died smiling. And Odin was actually one of the few characters in the story who knew what the will of D was. I mean, he found out in Laugh Tale. There's also this line pertaining to Law that's been repeated a couple times about how people with the D initial typically lead or have lived checkered lives. And so there's one moment in the anime where the narrator says that no one has lived such a checkered life as Kuma has. So I'm willing to bet that Kuma is either going to be revealed to be a D, or he's going to become a D, and that he's going to show up and he's going to save Bonnie, and that before he dies, he's going to smile. I just have that scene in my mind of him saving everybody, and the last thing he hears is Luffy going, Translation-wise, there's actually two words that jumped out at me from the official translation. The first one is that apparently the natives of God Valley are known as the Rabbit Natives. It says here, in addition to the Rabbit Natives, we have a selection of problem slaves and criminals to hunt. On second thought, I really don't think that means that the residents or the natives of God Valley are from a special rabbit-like race. I just think that it means that they're gonna get hunted like rabbits. And then the other thing is that the doctor that was there during Kuma's delivery actually reveals the name of Kuma's father. He calls him Clapp. So his name could be a reference to a man called Roger Clapp, who was an English colonist who settled in Massachusetts, but it could also be a reference to the verb of clapping, which would serve to connect him more to Joy Boy. Now, what's interesting about the name Clapp being the name of a colonizer is that by the end of the chapter, along with Ivankov, we see a new character called Ginny. And Ginny is a short version of the name Virginia. And Jamestown, Virginia was the first permanent English settlement in what eventually became the US. And so I know there was speculation about Ginny possibly being related to Luffy, possibly Luffy's mom because of her eating the meat, but I really do think that Ginny is actually related to Bonnie, especially because during Bonnie's introduction, she's also eating some meat as well. And so now thanks to this chapter, we finally got confirmation of what the three races were that Big Mom was missing in her territory. And those races are the Lunarians, the Giants, and obviously the Buccaneers. It also brought me back to that panel in Sabaody where we saw like the list of different races, because there was a section in that page that said others, exotic species, will be given a special price. Now in regards to God Valley, according to Sengoku, we were told that Garp and Roger teamed up to protect the Celestial Dragons and their slaves. So we don't know if that's exactly what happened. I mean, we'll find out eventually, but I really want to find out what Roger saw that in his mind he was like, okay, Zebek is the biggest threat here. Like I have to deal with Zebek. So it should make for a really good character moment for Roger where you have Zebek and the Rocks Pirates who are crazy strong, but they don't really work together well as a team. And then on the other hand, you have these celestial dragons going around holding a competition to hunt other people. It could turn out to be a similar situation to the one that we saw in Hashinosu with Kobe, where the Marines were technically there to fight the Blackbeard pirates, but Kobe was also freeing a lot of the prisoners and a lot of the slaves at the same time while he was there. So we might even get to see a Roger and Pedro moment there, except this time it'll be between Roger and Kuma. I know that there's been some speculation of the possibility of Whitebeard possibly also being a descendant of the Buccaneers, and if that's the case, then I also happen to see that Weevil kind of fits the same sort of upper body shape of a Buccaneer as well. So maybe there is something to that, because 3 of the characteristics that we have so far that distinguish a Buccaneer are their size, their strength, and their durability. Well, then also the shape of their upper body as well. And so I'm going to leave you with this. A couple of chapters back, there was a moment where Bonnie was trying to hunt down Vegapunk, and she had this metal tube, this metal pipe, and she used a technique called distorted future. And so her upper body literally turned into the upper body of Kuma, of that of a Buccaneer. And so we saw in that scene that when she lands the hit, she doesn't hit Vegapunk, but she lands the hit on a wall and it literally busts it up. Like you can see the wall crack and give out some dust clouds and everything because of the power boost in her strength. And so I was reminded of the Kaido versus Luffy fight, where at one point Luffy turns into a giant, right? And that also kind of like added a lot of speculation to, well, like, was Joy Boy a giant? You know, does that explain, you know, his relationship with Tsunisha, the giant elephant? Does that also explain the giant straw hat that we saw Imu look at in Marijoa? But before he turns into a giant, there's a moment where Luffy goes like, muscle, 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 and he just gains the upper body of a Buccaneer. And he's able to just, you know, spin around Kaido like he's nothing. So it's kind of like he used the features and the strength of both a Buccaneer and a giant in the same fight. And even Ivankov says that Buccaneers actually have giant blood in them. So the 2 races are related. It's like Oda just keeps hyping Elbaf up without hyping it up directly. Finally, we know that the island of God Valley is destined to disappear without a trace, so I wonder if a pre-Mother Flame type weapon was used to erase it. That is going to do it for me today, guys. Thank you so much for watching and for all your thumbs up and subscriptions. I really, really appreciate it. Can't thank you enough. I hope you guys have a great week. If you want to, you can follow me on Instagram at Team7Mage. Other than that, I wish you all the best. Take care, and I'll catch you guys later. Bye.